Okay, then can we start off talking about something else we talked about beforehand?
That one time that you came over at night and snuck into my bed. No, I don't want to talk about that on open discussion that's recorded. That's not
uh,
for our audience to know.
no, well, not that time, but last time we talked, you threw out something that I wanted to explore a little further. It was like you said that debate between President Trump and uh, Joe Biden was a huge win for our enemies. And I thought that was
Yep.
pretty profound because I hadn't really thought of that before. What do you mean by that? It was a win for our enemies. Like, I kind of get what you mean, but what do you mean?
When it's our disadvantage or when it's a disadvantage for America is when we can't organize ourselves, get our resources in line, get our beliefs in line, and move forward with one goal. Right now, what we have is chaos, and our enemies, our adversaries, will relish in that chaos. So they will seek an advantage to this. They have an advantage to America not being organized, not being able to capitalize on how it uses its resources, how it moves its population, really how it drives the world economy and the world's laws, I guess you could say, the influence that America has on the world. So
But
when we are
what,
neglecting that,
what,
go ahead.
how does the debate influence that? Like, how does debate
You
have anything
have
to do with that?
you have two fumbling idiots completely arguing and stepping on each other. No organization and thought,
Mm.
no real moment or movement forward on any policy, no clear plan or path forward for once they're in office or remain in office. So what this shows is weakness and vulnerability, and it spreads chaos and discontent within our population,
Mm.
and our adversaries are gonna reap the benefits of that. China is going to capitalize on us being confused and not finding our path. Russia is going to capitalize on the same exploits.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, our enemies are relishing in the fact that we can't get our shit together. We don't have a group thought, a group movement heading towards a direction that's going to keep Americans in line with power and structure.
What about, I guess maybe too, our allies as well are looking at us and being like, dude, what's going on in your court? I guess that would be a fair kind of, not
Yeah.
just our adversaries, but also our allies.
Oh,
So,
100%.
so like, what would, in your view, be a better way to represent ourselves through a debate? Because I'm confused as to how the debate should be perceived. Because the people watching it outside of this country are who? I guess maybe people with vested interests, and how is it that people are looking at this and
Well,
determining,
I
okay,
think that it's important to take a look at how a debate structure and a debate winner and loser is really understood. A debate winner is somebody who can convey their ideals, convey their plans, their message, and have it received as an understanding and agreed upon at that too, right? That's how you win a debate is you convince the populace or the audience what you want your message to be.
mm-hmm.
And I think that that's the first thing is understanding how to win the debate, how to win the audience and capture that. So the rules in the debate need to be clear. The platform needs to be clear. The topics need to be consistent and they need to be outlined prior. So that way you can have a little bit of a background knowledge before you go into it. Like, okay, we're going to talk about these 6 topics. We're going to talk about taxes. We're going to talk about coronavirus. We're going to talk about the Green New Deal. And you can have a predisposed opinion going into it. But then after your parties that you're watching truly debate, not argue and step on each other's toes, but actually truly give you an opinionated or even a factually based perspective of what they would like to see done with that particular topic, then that's how they're going to be able to reach an audience appropriately. And our populace, our American population, as well as our overseas adversaries and allies, can see those messages and understand if they actually do want to be in line with us,
Mhm.
or if it's advantageous for them to work in a different angle.
And you would say that having a more structured debate like that would come across to our adversaries and our allies that we have our stuff together, that we're actually debating the real issues in our country and looking at presenting solutions to those concepts.
It shows that we have our ducks in a row. It shows that we're presenting solutions, but it also shows that we do our research and that we're actually having an adult conversation. So
With our people.
let's say that, with our people. Let's say that you have two countries that have a rift on a subject. We'll say oil for a simple topic. Well, not really a simple topic, but for a well-known topic. Russia, let's say that they want to flood the West with their oil. OPEC wants to flood the West with their oil, but the West wants to become more self-sufficient, but we don't want to impact the global market. How are we actually going to come to an agreement and come to a mutual agreement where all three parties can equally benefit or benefit enough to be able to come to this agreement? And what we showed in this debate is that we have two powerful leaders with huge amounts of American support who can't even understand a topic. And then as they move into the topic, they just beat up on each other with personal accusations and defenses. So
when you put it that way,
if you're a world leader, how do you want to even sit down with somebody who's going to have that type of mentality coming into the arena to discuss?
But also, I think that those two people, specifically Trump, more so than Joe in this one, is that I don't know that Trump's ever going to talk to another world leader the way he talked to Joe Biden. So I don't know if that's like a good barometer for, the Chinese dictator, president, or emperor, whatever you want to call him. He has dealt with Trump in much more kind fashion. Kim Jong-un has talked to Trump in a much more back and forth fashion than whatever that was.
I don't know if I agree so much with that, though, because he has belittled and berated some world leaders.
Yeah.
And not just world leaders, but not just world leaders who, might not need the American support, but to some of our powerful allies, Germany.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's been bombastic to them as well. And I think this is where we're kind of blurring the lines between like a performance, meaning theatrics, versus performing the functions of the president. And I think
he's not a very presidential person.
There's a blurred line.
He has created blurred lines, yes.
Yeah, fair. Or we have created also a stage for him to blur the lines even further. I think that's also accurate. It's not, we can't just blame Trump. I think, and this is something that I want to talk to you, in the future, because I've been really working on these ideas, but we can't just focus on blaming Trump as the cause for this. Back in 2016, I had a very clear thought that Trump isn't the president we need. He's the president we deserve. And we created an opportunity or an environment for Trump to come in and further divide. It's like once you get that axe wedged into a little stump of wood, it's much easier to drive it in and split the wood. And I think we created a groove for Trump to come into.
Yeah. I can agree with that. I think that a lot of the Trump supporters, they really bought this idea that Trump was going to go in and drain the swamp and et cetera. But what we ended up with was a con man who filled the swamp with more swamp monsters, just different swamp monsters.
Yeah.
So, he got rid of some ones, Jeff Sessions is out. Mm-hmm. Good on that. There's some good ones that are gone, or some bad ones that I should say that are gone, but he's also filled them with some really terrible people too.
Sure. So, I think that's so powerful though. You said that our adversaries are looking for, what the type of conversations our two leaders are having with the American people. And we can't have a cohesive single conversation.
Think about it this way too, like just as the example using oil again. I mean, like, what
I
if,
like that example.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, and it's pretty clear that Russia's interest is to sell their oil across the world, right? And they're going to take over land and build pipelines aggressively, annexing land, even so in other countries, to be able to move their oil, creating new shipments, creating new pathways to get that oil across. Sometimes it's going to be good. Sometimes it's going to be bad. Sometimes it's going to be forceful. Sometimes it's going to be without oversight for environmental health. And what's happening, though, is America is going to go into negotiations with other oil countries and other oil territories, and they're going to have this bravado American representation trying to beat down their throat what they need to do. And in the other side of the room, you have Russia that's saying, hey, we can get you this oil. Why don't we get it for you a little bit cheaper and a little bit less dramatic, is what bravado over here is doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's
and
it's
then
just
China
be,
is listening to the conversation.
And what China's doing, China's buying up mineral rights all over the world. They're in Africa. Like 90% of the mining that's done in Africa is owned by Chinese companies.
Holy cow.
China is buying up all of the world's mineral rights. That's terrifying, because then they can say, I don't think you guys need any of those resources for your lithium ion batteries anymore.
Sure.
Or I think you're going to pay 300% more than when they were Western owned mines. So,
and if you have a country that's disorganized like the United States, it's a lot easier to leverage your weight on them.
Yeah.
Because they're not organized, right?
Because they're not organized.
Yeah.
Maybe a lot of these policies are slipping under the radar because they're just not up front to the administration to view, to see. One, maybe they just don't have the resources to see it because Trump hasn't filled the cabinet, or hasn't filled his political cabinet with people. Two, he probably doesn't have the comprehension because he doesn't put experts in. He puts nepotism. He fills it with nepotism and friends. So he doesn't have the experts that are sitting there to bring these issues up front. Three, the ability to have factual intelligence that comes to him from allies. I mean, that's not really good either, because you're burning bridges with allies. So the allies don't want to bring that information to us to help us out, to keep us in the loop with things. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of other factors I'm sure that I'm missing, but those are the three big ones that stick out to me when you have a shitty administration like Trump.
No, I think it makes total sense, because if one of the things that I just realized is that the debate was another way to pull the wool over your eyes, because if you have really strong policy positions that have truly benefited the American people, Trump alluded to a couple things that he's done, but it's so hard to tell what's honest and what's fake because of the inconsistency in his messaging in terms of blending the lines between true and false. If you have a truly superior plan, a truly superior authority through institutional power, you can just talk about the things that you're doing for the American people. You don't have to stoop to, debasing your enemy. You don't have to stoop to superficial levels of tearing someone down. And I just realized that this performance may have been a way to avoid confronting the very real deficiencies in his administration. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that Joe Biden was equipped either mentally or even as the strategy team to really poke holes in that, because he didn't poke holes very well in Trump. He played up a big game in the primaries talking that he would beat Trump like a drum, but we didn't see that either. What we saw was clearly a person who was incapable of handling Trump as a child. Yeah. And instead start playing Trump's game. Yeah. I also, from that debate, some of the outcomes is that you have Trump supporters who saying that Trump won the debate. What do you think about that?
I think we all have to tell ourselves something to be able to sleep well at night for our transgressions and our failures.
Well, to me, I think it's getting at something that is deeply concerning if you are correct about our enemies wanting to see us unable to communicate to our people. Is that if you believe that Trump won the debate, I don't think you understand what the premise of a debate is to begin with. And if you believe he won, then I'm not certain that you're clear what the criteria is of winning. Like, you're playing a different game. That wasn't even a debate. So you can't say that there was a clear winner or loser. If you're going to make a game that someone is winning, then what Trump did was just win by dominating the conversation. If you dominate the conversation, you win. That's not a debate. That's something totally different. So it concerns me that there's a populace in the United States that believe Trump won, even if it's 5% of people. Those are still loud voices. 10% people, the minority voices are quite loud, who are spreading this "we won" type of language is so short-sighted that you don't realize that you're sowing the discord that our enemies and adversaries want within our own country. My brain hurts, dude.
Yeah, this sucks. It really does suck.
Yeah.
I'm going into my aunt and uncle's house, and on that side, I have an uncle who's a diehard Trump fan. And we get into it on social media. I wouldn't say often, but enough. And I can understand how Trump supporters would view the debate as though Trump did better. I think that that's just like the ideology that they're facing, that they want to see their guy be dominant. So they back him, they support him.
Sure. It's part of the value system.
Yeah. But what I still struggle with is, like, how are these diehard Trump supporters in existence? What have they really seen from Trump that they can benefit from that really is dramatically impacting their lives for the better? There's some policies and there's some things that he says, like pro-life, for example. I get it. Republicans want pro-life. They don't want pro-choice. They think that federal spending to Planned Parenthood is completely funding abortion clinics. It's wrong.
It's morally wrong to them. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a wrong statement. It's not correct. First of all, Planned Parenthood is not strictly an abortion clinic and is not receiving 100% funding from the Fed. That's wrong. The Democrats don't want that to happen either.
Yeah.
But that's the premise, and that's the belief that Republicans are basing this allegiance with Trump on, is one of those. And that's just a hot topic for it, right? So then they look at the other side. They look at Biden. They say, well, Biden's going to kill babies. No, Biden's not going to kill babies. But he might eat them, smell them, but he's not going to kill them. But I see that there's reasons to want to be a Trump supporter. I don't understand how there's such deep rooted support for Trump. Like, people who are out there waving flags every weekend for Trump and wearing their memorabilia for Trump and buying all of his shit that says, Trump this or dolls that,
great again.
I mean, I don't get it. I don't get it at all.
I mean, dude, this is why we started the podcast. This is Social Thorns. We're here to challenge not only other people's assumptions about what they have of the world, but challenge our own assumptions. So I'd be curious if you can have a conversation with your uncle to figure out why is it that he's about this, and can you articulate from his perspective what it is that is so compelling.
Well, this is what I get. This is what I get from my family is there's not a lot of research that they do to see what actually Trump has done.
From your perspective?
No, there's no facts that are given to me. Like, if I said, hey, name five things Trump has done for you, like, give me 5 actual things.
Right. But Scott, that is your that is your perception that they can't give you facts, because the idea of a fact is so different from them to you. So I think that I would challenge you is, what is their truth? They can't give you facts because it's a superficial level of analysis. You're a deeper thinker than that. But what is their truth?
I
That's
want
the
to
whole
know.
irony of this.
I want to know if they can name 5 things that Trump has signed into law that is a good thing. I mean, I would be happy if they can name 5 things that Trump has signed into law. Period.
I doubt it.
It's going to be subjective if it's a good thing or a bad thing. You know, like my agenda might not be good for what Trump has signed, but their agenda might be good for what Trump has signed. But I want to know if they can name 5 things.
If they can't name the new tax
I want
law,
to know. I want to know if they can name who the Secretary of Education is, who like anybody in Trump's cabinet, fucking Betsy DeVos, who comes from Michigan.
Yeah.
Where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
She's a piece of shit.
Yeah, I would just wonder, from your family's perspective, what is compelling about Trump, and what does he give them? I would imagine that it's much more than just federal policy, but it's a sense that you're on the right side. And that is so much more valuable than any sort of monetary things, just to feel like you're right.
Well,
and I don't know if they can articulate that.
Going back to what they really base everything off of, they think that Trump is making them more money. They think that the economy is doing better than Trump. And they think that Democrats are going to really take away some freedoms. And I say take away freedoms as in like gun rights, as in socialism is going to be implemented. They look at Antifa and they look at the Black Lives Matter movement, and they think that this is all like Democrat based. This is all stuff that's like on the Democratic agenda. This is all Biden and Clinton financing it all. Like conspiracy theory that.
So Black Lives Matter is a Democratic agenda, not a human agenda.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
This is the shit that I see and that I hear from some of my family members. Yeah.
Yeah. Wild, man. Well, I think that, this federal stuff can really be mind-boggling. So I think it's going to be more and more important in the years to come for people to start at least focusing on their local level stuff. I mean, I keep saying this across our podcast, but I think this is why this is so important, is that we got to figure out what's more important locally, because those federal things, yes, they're important, but to understand them requires so much understanding of multiple complex layers.
Sure.
That are difficult for a lot of people to even start analyzing, let alone understand. We don't fully understand it, but we try to analyze it. In the meantime, can we just focus on our local stuff that is more impactful and a little more closer to our level? Mm-hmm. So you got 2 more ballots for me. What do you got today?
Yeah. So both of these are pretty tied together closely. It's Proposition 20.
That's the prison one.
Yeah, this is restricts parole for certain offenses currently considered to be nonviolent, and authorizes felony sentences for certain offenses currently treated only as misdemeanors.
Okay, I got to hear this one. Can we start on that one?
Yeah. So what this does is a yes vote. This allows increased sentences for habitual offenses, or for habitual offenders, such as like shoplifting, maybe some of the criminal offenses that we see homeless commit, vandalism, those types of offenses that as you are a second offender, third, fourth, fifth offender, your sentence is going to be increased as opposed to the weight of the actual crime. So for instance, if you habitually steal bicycles, currently right now, you're being charged for the crime and the value of that bicycle. Your weight or the previous record that you have isn't so much used against you. And this law is going to allow that to be used against you. So if you have been picked up 6 times.
To 3 strikes? I mean, 3 strikes is kind of that. It's like you get 3 and then we exponentially increase the punishment. It's very similar. It's not the same, but it sounds similar.
Well, I think that has to do with certain types of offenses like DUIs. That's a good example of the 3-strike rule. So I know that across many states that if your first offense for a DUI, some might consider that to be a slap on the wrist, getting a $10,000 fine, losing your license, et cetera, et cetera. Some might think that's a slap on the wrist. I don't know where you are on that, but I know that $10,000 doesn't sound like a slap on the wrist to me. But your third offense as a DUI, it could be a mandatory 1 year in prison. So I think that's what it is in Michigan. I could be mistaken. In California, I'm not so sure. I'm
So
sure it's
Michigan
something
already
similar.
does this kind of stuff?
Michigan does this for DUIs. I don't know if Michigan does this for these offenses such as.
So California's looked to apply a blanket habitual felony charge.
Yep. But this law also does a couple other things. It closes the gap for some of the violent offenders. So rape, murder, attempted murder, arson, things like that, in which that the gap right now is that they could be released early from prison sentences. And this is a bit confusing. I don't understand how this gap exists, and this law didn't really go into that. It's just basically kind of saying at a high level that people are getting out, and we want to make sure that people stay in. And this also allows law enforcement to collect DNA from convicted adults of misdemeanors. So what that means is, like, if you get picked up for, say, a theft misdemeanor, and you go into booking and you do your fingerprints, well, now they can actually do a DNA swab on you. And that DNA swab can be used and collected for research on if you've committed other crimes, if you're a part of a murder, if you're a part of a rape, if you're part of anything in the past that's unsolved. So it's interesting that they can be able to build this library up now that you've committed misdemeanor and gone in for this. So a vote no for this, the stance that this no is really taking is that this is overspending in California, that the criminal sentencing is already fair and long enough as it is, and that this is just going to basically create more bureaucratic red tape and costs that are associated with this. Now, I personally see two sides to the expenses.
Well, hold on. Let me make sure I understand the yes thing before you go forward. So yes means for non-violent felonies, we increase the level of punishment over time. That's one part of it.
For multiple strikes.
Multiple strikes. Okay.
So it's not that you commit a crime in 2012 or 2020. Mm-hmm. Let's say you commit the crime in 2020 and I commit the crime in 2025. There's no difference in how the sentencing should be unless you have committed it before.
Right.
And this is your second offense.
Right. So there's increasing levels of punishment each time you commit a non-violent felony as an individual.
It's using your record against you.
Yes. Leveraging your record against you. Okay. And then the second part was, can we let people out earlier?
The second part is preventing people being let out earlier.
For violent crimes.
Yeah. So basically right now, like, you have these instances where COVID hit, prison population. Many people were released from prisons because COVID hit and they didn't want to have them in there. So there was a gap that would allow people to be released because of a pandemic. That's one example of gap that I could see. Okay. I personally don't agree with that. I think that you do the time, or you do the crime, you pay the time, because there's a national pandemic. I don't think that we should see violent offenders be released for that.
I think they specifically released non-violent offenders, I want to say. I don't remember the news story, but I remember that did happen. I
saw reports of both non-violent and violent offenders. I don't know what's true, though. It could have been biased.
Be good to know.
Yeah.
And then so they want to essentially not make it easy or to restrict the accessibility to parole, early release, or are you saying exceptional case releases?
I'm saying exceptional case releases.
Okay. So they're trying to close loopholes on exceptional case release.
Yeah.
And then the third part is we collect DNA on misdemeanors.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh.
Mandatory collection of DNA on misdemeanors.
I don't like this at all. I don't like a yes vote at all. So I don't know. I'm not 100% clear on all the opposition arguments. You mentioned some, but based on the premises of what yes would say, I fundamentally am usually against the expansion of criminal justice. That's usually a moral stance that I take is limiting the expansion of criminal justice. DNA evidence is super important, I think, because it helps exonerate people. But in terms of increasing its scope into applying to a misdemeanor, so assuming that the police officers, detective are willing to take a swab because they say, you know what, let's just do a swab on this guy. I think it's entering people prematurely into the system. I think I don't know if I want to expand that because I had a misdemeanor on my record, right? But do I need my DNA into the system? I don't know.
It's a bit tough for me too, just for the sense of like you said, it's premature to enter somebody in the system for misdemeanors. I mean, you got to think what's a misdemeanor? There's a lot of things that are considered a misdemeanor.
Exactly.
Let's say
that's the problem.
Let's say that you did you bumped a street sign with your car. That could be considered a misdemeanor because you just hit state property or federal property and damaged it, and you didn't report it on time, right? Something like
being
that.
A nuisance.
Being a nuisance is a misdemeanor, yeah. And then being mandatory DNA collection, I don't like that. Now, if you get booked, you go to jail, sure. Yeah. If you're going to go to impound or whatever, you're going to go into processing, yeah, I think that DNA could be collected. I'm okay with that.
I would be okay if, let's say, someone has a misdemeanor and there is cause for concern that you issue a warrant for DNA collection, because then it requires we're taking this case by case rather than blanket and kind of really adding a layer to a misdemeanor, which I don't know that's necessary. I think because there might be some kid who's like deranged and you're like, dude, this kid, something about him, it's not right. This is what he did. This is what I'm concerned about. I'll issue it to a judge. The judge says, you don't have a case, or dude, you should probably collect DNA evidence. Here's a warrant, and you assign it. I think that's going to happen less frequently. I mean, you could probably, anyway, go ahead.
Well, another example of in my opinion, like a petty misdemeanor that doesn't necessarily warrant a DNA text or DNA collection. Let's say that you have a speeding ticket out on your record. And you didn't pay your speeding ticket on time because you didn't set it up. You're just negligent. You didn't do it. Does a speeding ticket really warrant that an officer is going to come and do a DNA swab on you?
Yeah.
I don't know if I like that. And this could be just something that's not addressed appropriately in what I've researched. It could be that maybe you're in processing and you're being charged and it could result in a misdemeanor, but you're actually sitting in processing. You're sitting in a jail cell, in a county jail.
Okay.
Pending. I'm okay with DNA being taken there. I'm not okay with DNA being taken just because you neglected to pay a speeding ticket. So, but let me continue on with these no's. So it's predominantly financial based.
I'm very curious because I found this earlier is where Republicans and Democrats are split along these measures. And I think that could be an interesting just viewpoint on a measure like this, because oddly enough, they collect that stuff and you can see whether or not you're voting along party lines.
I'll tell you who's for this and who's against this as I get further down.
Okay.
So the no's it's just considered to be a spending scam, essentially. California already has enough control over long sentencing and over the releasing of violent offenders. They don't need more oversight on this. It's going to possibly cut funding, and this is possibly cut funding for rehabilitation programs and education and things like that. So that's the no side of it. Now, I did a little bit of research on how much money is actually dumped into the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And it's $15.8 billion as of last year, which is 7.4% of our state's budget. So in October of 2006, there were approximately 173,000 prisoners. Now that's gone down. Today we're sitting at about 125K. So we're almost 22K less, somewhere around there. Is it attributed to programs that are doing positive to rehabilitate criminals? Is it attributed to sentencing is higher and criminals don't want to actually do the crime? Those are the questions that I think that we need to have addressed before we really put a vote to this. And unfortunately, we don't have the time.
Yeah.
So
I think it would be at least minimum 3-pronged approach where you're looking at rehab programs. You're also looking at what you actually charge people for, and then what the punishments are ahead of time. So it's like, are you, the drug trade, they came up with practices of like hit them up on the sidewalks, right? Street sweeps, where you just take down petty criminals who are at the bottom of this drug pyramid, but really the real crimes are happening at the top of these organizations. Not the little grunts are just pawns that are going to get cycled through. You're not actually solving crime, but you're increasing prison numbers, right? So is that effective? Is that effective criminal justice? I don't think that it is, but it increases a number of arrests. So, yeah.
Well, that's the thing is like I'm considering who is going to be impacted most by this, and it's going to be obviously those petty criminals, and some of them probably are going to become lifelong in and out of the system. And there's certain subjects that we see out in the streets right now that are lifers. They get picked up for shoplifting every week and then pushed back out on the streets, and they're homeless, and this is just their life cycle. It's a vicious life cycle. The other people too are like the children, young adults who are trying to do something fun and exciting and want to be hard in front of their friends. So they go and shoplift, it's just stupid stuff, like I myself am guilty of that. I got picked up for shoplifting when I was a teenager. I didn't do it again, but I certainly know people who did, and they ended up turning out to be good people. A couple fucking slaps on the wrist, not $10,000 fines, but a little bit of time in the correction system sometimes is good for an individual, but keeping an individual in the corrective system for their life or a good portion of their life, I don't know if it's a good thing. Yeah. So the proponents for this, there's a tremendous amount of public officials on prop.org's website. They have a link to this 9-page document that has all of these Democratic public officials, safety officials, small business owners, neighborhood members. I mean, this thing is just, it's a ridiculously long list. Gavin Newsom's on it. Almost all of our Democratic senators are on it. There's a handful of Democratic mayors across California that are on it. There's an overwhelming support from public officials for this bill.
Why are the Democrats for this? Why? And maybe I'm throwing a blanket out there, but why would a person like Gavin Newsom or Kamala Harris be for this? Do you have an understanding of why they say a yes vote's important?
I didn't review or research any of that from them. I can only think that Kamala Harris wants to say yes is probably because she has some invested interests in the prison system, and this keeps population up and keeps people in the prison system. I don't think that this is actually a corrective rehabilitation program to prevent people from getting in the system. I think that this is actually a trap to keep people in the system. And Democrats, California is run by Democrats, right? The prison system is essentially run by Democrats. So these are the people that have investments in the prison system.
It blows my mind because I normally think of people who are more Democratic don't want to punish more people. I usually think that's a Republican thing. So that surprises me that so many Democrats are for this. And I'm confused because based on what you're saying, you're expanding the criminal justice system. You're not closing loops. You're not creating opportunities for people to leave the system early. All those three things that you mentioned are all opportunities to keep you in the system longer.
Yeah.
And earlier.
Yeah. I think it just comes down to finances. I think, again, these are just people who have vested interests in the prison system monetarily. So
I don't like it. I'm a huge no vote. I don't need to hear what the opposition is because
the opposition is like
normally,
the ACLU. It's a minority commerce. These associations and coalitions that are run by minorities locally and that type of thing. So that's who I found were in opposition for it. And
yeah,
strangely enough, the funding for both of these sides, it's about 8 million for funding for and about 9 million for funding against. So they're kind of close. And I really didn't expect to see that it was so low funded. I figured that the lobbyists for, like the people who make money off of a prisoner going in to jail or prison, I figured that there would be a little bit more lobbyist money seen in there. So
yeah. I'd
I
be curious
am
of
a
how this
no
turns
as
out.
well. I
Yeah,
am a no as well.
gotcha.
I don't believe that this is going to pass with a yes or a no. I think that this is actually going to pass with a yes. I think that people are going to have, I think they're going to see that these big names are backing this, and I think they're going to go along with these big names. Gavin
Scary.
Newsom's voting for this. Oh, I'm a Democrat. I'm for Gavin Newsom and his policies. I'm going to vote for this as
Yeah,
well.
we voted against them a few times now.
So,
Once we're done, too, once the elections are over, we'll look at where the party lines are drawn across all the ballot propositions and where we fall and where the party lines fell.
yeah,
Because
it's going to be fun.
we've already done some with the Democrats and some with the Republicans. So
Yeah.
it's cool to see that how we're not just trending necessarily with one party line, that there's switching on depending on the issue. But dude,
I think we should release that before
sure.
as we finish up with this, but before the vote.
But I do want to say that I think that with a ballot proposition like this, I would be open to listening to a proponent for this and hearing a fact-driven or a methodological approach to why they would say yes. Like, look, X happens, Y happens, so then we're trying to have these Z outcomes. Like, I would be very open-minded to hearing it. However, I have a fundamental value, a fundamental moral code that will never seek to increase criminal justice.
Well,
So I have that barrier. I have that assumption. That is one of my moral foundations.
I like the idea that this is going to allow judges to sentence the repeat offenders who are lifers in the system for harsher sentencing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that it's a blanket law for some things. I don't like that it's a blanket law for DNA to be collected from misdemeanors.
Right.
I think that there should be some discretion with this. There's habitual offenders in OB
narrowly tailoring the law.
Yeah, there's some habitual offenders in OB that certainly need to be locked up for much longer than what they're getting locked up for. But then there's those cases where, again, you have, fucking young kids who are doing stupid things, making mistakes, who are just trying to get out of the system. This is going to lock them in the system. So I don't like that.
I would think that the argument for this is that you might say something like California is deficient in prosecuting people who do violent crimes, and we are not giving them crimes that are in line with the history of the person. Like, let's say you commit a violent crime, it's weighted on the actual occurrence, not the previous history. That's a great argument that we should close that loophole. The problem is that you have this desire to ensure that public safety is kept as your number one priority, but now you're adding these other rules, which are also increasing the scope of misdemeanor crimes, and then closing the loophole of your current status quo. Dude, these things need to be narrowly tailored, man. Why can't you just deal with one thing at a time? That's important. It's not always, I think it's like pulling the wool over your eyes. That's what it feels like. It's like, okay, we're gonna protect the people, but then we're also sliding this in to expand our own personal interest. We want to collect data on people so that, I don't know. I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't like the big brother mentality.
No.
It's a big issue for me.
Yeah. We need to create opportunities for people to engage our society in healthy ways, not create more opportunities for people to get pushed out of our society. It's a different focus. All right, no vote. We're both no votes. Ballots in front of us. We vote no.
Both no. Yep.
Okay. What's this other one? 24?
25. 25. So this is a proposition to replace cash bail with a risk assessment.
Okay.
So a vote yes upholds the contested replacing cash with a bail over risk assessment. So essentially, let's just stick with DUI. Let's say that you get pulled over for a DUI and your bail is 10 grand and you have the 10 grand to be able to pay it. You can get out on bail regardless on who you are. Let's say that you're a person from Sweden and you're here on vacation and you're renting a car. You get pulled over, your bail is 10 grand, you pay your 10 grand, you get out.
Okay.
Now, the intent is to prevent high risk and flight offenders to be able to be released on bail. So they'll have a ranking system, a low, a medium, and a high. A low meaning that you're likely going to show up for court. A medium, okay, you might not be as likely to show up for court. A high being, all right, this person's definitely not showing up for court.
And is it just to show up to court, or is it to also commit other offenses and crimes?
It's preventing other offenses and crimes as well. So it's a high risk and flight. So high risk as though like you're a habitual criminal, habitual offender on all kinds of different things. Do we want to set a low bail for you, cash bail for you on this low crime that we just got you on when you've committed higher crimes before, with the sense that you're going to go back out and commit more crimes? So they look at your record again. The no is, it's really interesting to see where this is. And I had to follow the money a little bit more on this one. I like the idea of having a risk associated with flight and repeat criminal offenses tacked onto what your bail should be. I like that. But I don't like that rich people can just buy themselves out of jail either. So that's not good.
OJ's out on bail.
Yeah, exactly. Looking at who was in support for this and who was against it was really the tipping point for me. It really does impact a lot of small businesses, these bail bondsmen, these fund rolling people who put the money up for a poor individual who's paying with their, a loan that they're going to pay a premium on to be able to get out. So it impacts that. There's a lot of businesses that's actually going to hit.
Which I'm kind of unsympathetic to that kind of business who is
it's kind of a sleazy business.
Yeah, it's a sleazy business. So I'm not sympathetic to that.
So there's that. But there's also a possibility that this is going to decrease the amount of money that goes into the jail system itself, the county jails. Because if you have people who are released on a low risk, which I think most people who get picked up for crimes are really low risk. I think that there's a small amount of population. This is the statistics for this. People who are incarcerated right now in the jail system, there's 41.7 people who are pending sentencing. There's 26.2 people who are second strikers, or 26.2% who are second strikers. There's 5.4% who's a third striker. There's 21.4 who are lifers. So regardless if it was a first, second, or third offense, murder, you're going to get life, right? Or some kind of murder, you're going to get life. There's 4% who's life without parole. There's 6.6%, 0.6, who's death row, getting a phone call. And there's 0.7 who's other, which means like you're probably in limbo going to another state because you committed a crime in another state and got picked up in California. So what I'm trying to point out here is with that 41.7, it's a big chunk of people who are processing. And that's a big chunk of people who could be identified as either low, medium, or high and released on low or medium held on high. So that 41.7, that population diminishes rapidly. Now, if you remember in Prop 20, so there's 125,000 people or 123,000 people who are incarcerated right now. So 41.7% of those people are pending. That takes away a lot of need for staff in the prison system.
Gotcha.
What that creates, though, is a need for staff in the bureaucratic side of it, the pre-processing, your arraignment, your portfolio that they're putting together, all those case files that they're building against you for your crime. So there's more of a need for that type of bureaucracy, that red tape, as opposed to the other side as a correctional officer, jail employee. So I don't really know what the cost. Yeah, I don't really know what the costs could be with, associated with this, but they say that this could possibly cost up to the mid hundreds of thousands of dollars in this bureaucratic side where they're pre-processing you and building that portfolio together.
Drop in the bucket.
Mid hundreds of thousands, though, but I think that a lot of that would be ironed out over a little bit of time. In the sense that, like, you got to create some new programs, you got to have some new training. But once you get the wheels greased and the ball moving a little bit further down the road, I think that cost is going to go down. Now, with the immediate savings.
Hold on. First, there has to be an acknowledgement that there is going to be significantly less money going through that system, because now you are weighing bail, and people who would have paid $10K are now paying $1,000 or something like that.
Exactly.
So you have less overall money going into the system now.
Yeah, less overall money going into the system.
Okay.
And I was just going to point that out too. Actually, there is a significantly less amount of money going into the system, removing the bails. So is that a good thing, though? Maybe some of these first offenders can't afford a lot of their bails anyway, and this is just tying them down in debt, thus creating more hardship for them to be able to get themselves back on the right path. So people who are for this are your assembly members, your state senators, the governor again. People who are against this, of course, are your bail coalitions, the NAACP, crime victims, small business associations, who usually are tied to these types of bails.
Why would the NAACP be against this?
That's a good question.
Against them? Yeah.
That's a good question, because they think, and this is what the no for this is really standing on, they think that creating this low, medium, high is going to have racial and poverty biases.
That is 100% a valid concern.
Yeah, 100% a valid concern. So the argument is, for this being a yes, the argument is saying that there's not going to be racial bias and poverty biases associated with, because we're going to use algorithms as we build this individual's portfolio.
That's bullshit. Algorithms can be racist too. What are you talking about?
Yes, they can. So let's go back to the affirmative action podcast where you said something along the lines of, well, you get 20 points if you're Black, 15 points if you're Asian.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that, so the program in itself is smart. You are looking to reduce overall money that's going into the system and provide people more of an out. It is highly likely that you're going to have disparate impact across people and ethnic groups by raising a system like this. But I would think that the overall outcome would go, like the overall amount of money going through the system, the overall amount of people who have to pay maximum bonds is going to go down. That includes minorities. Mm-hmm. But you're going to have exceptional cases or patterns of disparate treatment at some point. And it all has to do with how well that assessment is administered. So the assessment is really the crux right there, because the assessment in and of itself could be valuing certain data points over others, and it's a subjective question. It's not objective whether or not certain measures should be higher or lower.
Yep. So this is where I'm at on it. I'm a yes for this.
Me too.
I'm a yes for this because I think that the intent is to help keep prisons with a lower population. Mm-hmm. It's to help keep those who can buy themselves out of prison actually in the justice system and get some justice served. I think in California, we see a lot of people walking away because they can afford to walk away, not because they deserve to walk away.
Right.
And I think that there's going to be some hard lessons learned with this. And I think it's going to come down to, like you said, that crux of this system, how it's weighing whether or not you're a low, medium, or high. But I think that at the end, I think that this has some good intentions. I think this is placed well. And I think that some of the hardships that are going to be associated with this down the road, or in the immediate future, rather, I think that they're worth struggling through, because I think in the
Yes.
long term, this is going to pay off.
I'm 100% with you, and it goes back to my moral foundation of I seek to reduce the expansion of criminal justice, and I see this as a reduction in criminal justice. It is increasing opportunities for people to re-engage with the society, and again, I think that part of the opposition, I would think, goes to this sort of anti-racist narrative that is currently happening in our country. And I actually ordered that book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, or I forgot the title of the book, but the main thing is Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. And I have some objections to some of his premises, but I want to read the book and fully understand it before I defer judgment on this. But one of his tenets is that people, if you want to be anti-racist, you vote against policies that are racist. And unfortunately, this is one of those policies that could have racist outcomes, at least by the definition of what a racist policy is. Like, we can debate whether or not policies are racist, but by their definition, by his definition, this would be a racist policy because it creates a disparity. However, let us say that currently blacks are being incarcerated at a higher rate than whites, or let's just use minorities. But I think blacks are a good counter position because it's such a hot topic, blacks versus whites. But you can also talk about Hispanics, Asians, Pacific Islanders, all that kind of stuff. White Latinos, that's a whole different category, right? So if we have higher rates of incarcerations among blacks and than whites, then there's some racism according to this theory, which there's some validity to that. But if you reduce the overall amount of arrests across both groups, yet there's still a disparity, is that policy racist, or is it benefiting everyone? And now we just have to grapple with the disparity, right? Like, so I'm thinking that something like this is going to reduce the overall amount of time people spend in jail, and overall amount of money people have to pay those bail systems. But it is going to create some disparities, and we'd have to tackle the assessment on how that's being performed. And it's bullshit that someone says, oh, no, we have algorithms. Man, algorithms are biased too.
Yep. Just depends on who the author of the algorithm is.
All right, so we're no's going against, at least for me, I'm going against my party, Democrats, on the first bill. And then I'm a yes going with my party on the second bill.
Sounds about right.
All right, man, this was good.
A couple interesting topics.
All right, I'd be curious to hear how you talk to your uncle, and I'm hoping that you ask him some tough questions that you walk away learning something from him, because I would like to hear that.
I'm probably going to have to get out of there really fast.
All right, man, you enjoy it.
I'll catch you later.
All right, see ya.
Bye.